And we are live. What's up, everybody? Everybody. Who knows? There might not even be anybody here. I don't know. If you can hear me, if anybody's out there, let me know in the comments. Yeah. Happy Day Eve. Indeed. How you doing, Aaron? I am. I've had a good night. Went out to dinner. Had a nice night with the kids and wife. It's good stuff, but not much to do right now. So hanging out with you all. I've invited a guest on, so we'll see when they pop on, if they do. I'm here and I hear you. Thanks. Appreciate it. I'm everybody. You're not everybody. Apparently there's 17 people here. Do you all stay up late or are you waking up early? What's the deal there? Love your content, brother. Keep doing you. Thanks. Appreciate it. Haven't done a lot of content lately. I think it's been like a week since I put out my last video. But I have a video coming out tomorrow, so that's something. And then I should finish 2 more books in the next 2 or 3 days. So a couple more videos to round out the month, which would be cool. 1 book I like, 1 book I don't like. So, take what you can get. And there he is. What's up, Ben?
Hello.
How you doing?
Oh, good evening. Oh, very good. Very good. No work tomorrow. Don't have to worry about that. Oh, no, it's great.
Sweet. So everybody, I feel like a lot of you know who this is, but if you don't, this is Ben from Books with Benghis Kahn. I will, it's kind of hard to find your channel, Ben, by Googling it. But I will put a link in the description to this video after I get off here, so you'll be able to find it.
No, maybe
it's just everyone just assumes I'm talking about some other relatively famous Khan.
Yeah, when I had the same issue, I should have known, because when I used to type in Library of Alexandria, YouTube would automatically change the search to Library of Alexandria by default, which I guess I understand, but yeah, so if you try to search for books with Benghis Kahn, you'll get Genghis Khan instead. It was just this old nickname.
Yeah, Google's like, you can't possibly mean this YouTuber. That's awesome. Well, what are you reading right now, Ben?
I am towards the end. Okay, I just finished the most recent Murderbot book, and I feel like,
which one's that?
System Collapse. It just came out.
I have not read. I don't think I'm going to read it, actually.
It was very mediocre experience. Like, I remember I binged the first 4 novellas. Are you caught up to Murderbot? Or
so the publisher sent me the most recent one, but I don't know. I don't think I can bring myself to read it.
No. Well, I like the original 4 novellas. Like that, I feel like I would have been happy if it just would have been like this little bunch of novellas, this little story, and then the whole novel, Network Effect, it just kind of threw the whole thing off. Like, it was this longer novel and just like overstayed its welcome. And then she went back in time before that novel with like a little novella, and like, what's the point of this? And I kind of just lost all momentum with it. And it was okay. It was fine. It's this like 240-page book, and I read it over 5 days because I just never got the urge to pick it up. So I was actually reading something else and doing audio for something else at the same time. The Trader of Redwinter, which is book 2 in the Redwinter Chronicles by Ed McDonald. And
yeah, never heard of this.
I like it. So it's Tor. So it's trad pub. But McDonald's is one of those like mid-listers for Tor, where his books, like if you look on Goodreads, like they just get like 1,000 or a couple thousand ratings. So he hasn't really broken out yet. And he did the Ravenfall series. Like I want to read that. That sounds really cool. But this one is more like epic fantasy, kind of first person single POV, like the Farseer trilogy. Really reminds me of Hob. Like, it's a really deep character work, slow moving, interesting, like feels nuanced and like with like a very relatable, realistic character, which I found. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. When I'm in the mood for it, I can really love it and can feel deep and like reflecting all the complexities of real human life in our world. But sometimes I just want to read for escaping and having more heroic character arcs and less complicated characters. But like maybe it's just the wrong time for me because I've been reading 𝐿 also. Just throughout this year, I've been reading Live Ship Traders, Tawnyman, the first 2 Rainwell books.
Yeah.
And I think 𝐿 is occupying that space where it's like really messy, realistic, like human drama. And I'm not really in the mood for it outside of that. But it's good. It's good. But yeah.
Well, I want to talk to you about 𝐿. And by the way, Tom says that he agrees with you 100% and was let down. I think he's talking about the Murderbot one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just very mid.
I want to talk to you about the 𝐿 books. So you're reading, did you finish the second Rainwild Chronicles book?
Yeah. I just couldn't. I was supposed to just read like 1 book a month to do my buddy read with Colin, but I was just like, the first Rainwild book ended and you're just in the middle of this journey. It felt like I had to continue. So I just went and continued and read 1 and 2, Dragon Keeper, Dragonhaven. So I finished the first 2 Rainwild, and that basically took us through like this whole plot arc and these character arcs that feel complete. So like I feel like I just finished the sub series, and that it was like a decent stopping point. But no, I really enjoyed it. I loved those first 2.
So I feel like what most people say is that they don't like Rainwild. I, meanwhile, did not enjoy the first 2 and loved the second 2. So I hope that we're not opposites here. I hope that you're still going to enjoy the next 2.
Oh, I think so. I think it's impossible. Like I'm on this crazy streak with 𝐿 because I didn't fall in love with the Farseer trilogy because I let it go like 4 years before picking up Live Ship when Colin really got me into the buddy read. And but ever since the start of Live Ship, I think maybe I'm just in a better place for 𝐿, or just the type of story just drew me in more. And every book has been 5 stars since Ship of Magic for me. So
really,
yeah. Just it's been an incredible streak from all 3 Live Ship books, all 3 Tawnyman, the Piebald Prince novella, the first 2 Rainwild books. I think it helped that I did have kind of low expectations for it, but I like the specific plot journey that they went on and the interesting whole plot with the keepers and, well, it's in the titles, like the dragons. I was just so engaged by all the dynamics between everyone. And so I love the plot and the female POV characters. Unlike in Live Ship, where it took me a little while to warm up to a lot of the POV characters, like I became really attached to Thymara and Elise like immediately. Like I just was rooting for them so much, and they were easy to root for, and from the very beginning. So it's like growing attached to them. Cedric was a really cool like character who you could tell like has a good heart but is doing some bad things. There aren't that many characters actually in fantasy that I read that are actually like that, where it's not that they're morally gray, it's that they actually, like, you could tell there's a good soul, like a good heart underneath, but then they very intentionally do morally wrong things. So it's like I'm horrified but also rooting for this character to come to realizations and grow. And that was an very interesting character for me. So all the character stuff was really interesting, and the plot so suspenseful. I had no clue what was going to happen, and felt really high stakes for the whole world. That and things from Live Ship were all leading up to this, and so yeah, I've been loving it. And so if people typically like the second half of Rainwild more, that's great, because I think I'll likely love that too.
Are you going to jump straight into Fitz and the Fool afterwards, or will you give it some time?
Oh no, I love binging. I've always just enjoyed when I'm really into a series, just completely maximizing my immersion by like doing books as close to each other as possible. I keep more details in memory. I feel like I'm not thinking about other stories and settings, and just like my mind's just in that one setting with those characters and plots. So if I wasn't in the buddy read, I'd probably just have already continued reading Rainwild right now, and then just jump right into Fitz and the Fool and finish it out.
Yeah.
The buddy read is supposed to be like a book a month, and that's typically what you do with books. And it's definitely not my own preference, although I have enjoyed doing the buddy read with the discussions. They've added to my time, and Colin's, just loving the series too. So to be able to discuss it with someone who's just also loving it, and that's been fun and enriching my time with it. So I'm happy I'm doing it that way. But I'd probably have already finished it, but if I wasn't doing the buddy read.
Well, we got a comment that this bodes well for you, that you're gonna like the next two a lot more than the first two, and you like the first two,
good,
so
good.
You're in for it.
Speaking of binging,
well, you mentioned to me about how I space out my books. I feel like I'm in this like horrible, not horrible because I don't mind it, but like I used to read a series like back to back. Like I read Malazan, 10 books, no break. Yeah. But then I did this thing where I was like, oh, I'm in the middle of the series, but I got a new book came out, like, oh, there's a new John Gwen book. I got to go read it. Right. And then I was like, oh, well, I liked the Bloodsworn. Let me go read Faithful and the Fallen. And then I'm like, now I'm reading 2 series. And then like another thing happens. And then now I'm doing this thing on my YouTube channel where like, people can pick books for me to read. And then like, I'll fall in love with that series, and now it has to get in rotation. And so now I've got like this people talk about like the ever-growing TBR list, but I feel like I've got this ever-growing, like continued read list, which makes it so like I don't read 2 books in the same series. There's 2 or 3 months in between when I do them.
I was going to ask you about that because you enjoyed Empire and Black and Gold, and I've been so eager to see you continue on, and you haven't been able to.
I know
it's
December.
It makes sense with your patron wheel, with people choosing books from the TBR contest, which is so fun. Right?
Yeah,
I love that. You aren't in even complete control of the TBR, and so you're just getting new series, and it's great when you like them because. But then you're right; it is a big almost catch-22 because if you binge, then you're just going to be waiting longer and longer to continue those other series. So it's like by rotating, you're at least keeping everything somewhat fresh.
I think the only thing that keeps my sanity is that because I've got a BookTube channel and I've got like a community of people that can help me, when I start a series or like can pick up a series again, I have people I can go to say like, hey, fill me in, catch me up a little bit. And then otherwise I think I'd be lost.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's a huge benefit of having the Discord or lots of people around in the fantasy community. But like I'm looking at Dragonfly Falling. I think in these newer editions with the all black covers, I think he does a summary at the start of every book.
That's beautiful.
If you do it by ebook, I imagine you'll have these same editions.
Why do authors not do this more regularly? Like I don't get it. Like it's almost like upsetting to me when authors don't do it because it's almost as if they're telling the reader you should go reread these books before reading the next one, and it's like they don't come out with books every few months, there's years, or they're telling us I expect you not to be reading other books so you'll remember what's going on here, or it's like it's almost like pretentious. And how hard would it be for you, the author, to go write 2 pages just to fill me in? It would take you 10 minutes.
Yeah, not terribly hard. I think it's a huge favor to the readers. And I'm right with you. I love it. And if people aren't binging, like for a series like Shadows of the Apt, where it's so interconnected, it really is, single story over 10 volumes. And just if you're not fresh on a lot of the details, then that would hurt your experience in each subsequent book. So a summary like that just to catch you up, so good. Like we have thousands of books on our TBR, and if we reread, I always feel like a huge opportunity cost with rereading. Like I've done some each year over the past few years, and I've done it and strategically, and I've really loved rereading, like rereading some of my favorites. But yeah, there's the opportunity cost when we have a TBR in the thousands, and so we're not always going to be able to reread a whole series if it's releasing a new book every year. So love the summaries.
Can't do it.
Yeah, love it.
Well, I mean, and on really popular series like Stormlight,
there's wikis.
It's fine to not put it because clearly there's summaries out there. It's not. But on these series that aren't mega popular, like Empire in Black and Gold, I'm not. There's no way I'm going to go find a summary out there. It has to be by the author. And you'd also think it would benefit the author, like you said. It maximizes enjoyability from the reader.
Oh yeah,
it seems like a win-win.
Oh, definitely. Oh, I can't wait until you read this one. It has some of
is that number 2?
Yeah, number 2. This has some of the most impactful military sequences, some of the most gripping military sequences I've ever read. And I've read some great ones between John Gwynne, Stephen Erickson, Abercrombie, Gemmell. Like, Tchaikovsky's really good with the military aspects, and this is a kind of military heavy volume in the series. What's cool is that the series is definitely goes through different phases. Like this first 4-book arc is faster paced, like more POVs in every book.
Oh man, that's awesome. That was my big criticism with the first one, is that like I wanted a branching story. I wanted it to turn into a multi-POV epic.
The next 3 books there's a bunch of different branches, and we just continually rotate through all of them, and it leads to, at the end of this first 4-book arc, Salute the Dark is like the shortest book in the series. It's just like 7 different climaxes are happening all around the map, and it was absolutely insane, and I loved it. And then in a really interesting kind of thing for a series, there's like a bit of a time jump after, but not a very long one, just like a slight time jump, and there's like a series reset. And the next 3 books all just like kind of slow down. They follow fewer characters, and it felt like Tchaikovsky. These were his debut books too. Like in 2008, he published the first one, and then he was coming from being an academic. Like he was new to the whole author thing, and I think he kind of leveled up getting into book 5, where he like got this really hectic first arc done, and then I think a lot of people found like just there's this leveling up in book 5, 𝗟𝗄𝗃, where things like the character work feels like it gets richer. The thematic stuff, I think, gets richer. And then there's a few books that kind of slow down in the middle of the series, where you're spending more time with just a few of the characters, and then leading to this like convergence of a final trilogy where all the threads are playing out in really awesome ways. So I guess a little bit.
Have you read more Tchaikovsky, like the sci-fi stuff?
Yeah, I've been working on it. So Shadows of the Apps was my first Tchaikovsky, and that was his first 10 books, and I loved all 10. And he immediately became just one of my favorite authors. And even though he started publishing in like 2008, he has like 50 published books out. So if you're not reading like 5 Tchaikovsky books a year, you're actually falling behind based on how many, because he releases like multiple novellas a year, multiple novels a year, in different series and standalones. So I have a goal of catching up so that I can so this year I read Elder Race, which is an amazing standalone. It was like a 200-page novella, like long novella or short novel. Ogres, I did also an amazing novella. The duology, the sci-fi duology, Dogs of War and Bearhead, loved that. Actually, I've not had a miss with Tchaikovsky yet, but like I still have so many to go. So I actually want to do Children of Time soon, because that's his most famous book, and it's one of the ones I've actually had like owned physically and on my TBR for the longest, along with like the Lacanius trilogy. I've tried to get a lot of those oldest TBR books out of the way this year, and so I want to do Children of Time soon, because that's his most famous one. And so that's the start of one of his sci-fi series. He has another sci-fi series he's working on now. He's still releasing books in, like The Final Architecture. He has some fantasy standalones I want to get to, a couple of sci-fi standalones, Doors of Eden, Cage of Souls, Guns of the Dawn is a fantasy standalone a lot of people love. Like he has released so many things, and they all do feel differently so far. So it doesn't feel like Sanderson, who's has similar output, where like a lot of his books, they have that same Sanderson like voice and like tone and atmosphere, which I love. But Tchaikovsky really does, like, it feels different in the voice and tone, and he really changes his style a bit between the different standalones or series, which is cool. There's a lot of variety in his writing, and he has a lot of range. Oh yeah,
awesome.
but I still have a long way to go to catch up.
So there are a few comments I want to get to. Kyle does a good job recapping previous events. He does a great job. And wondering, do you read one specific book per day or multiple per day? I know you have a schedule. So I'm going to answer this in the Ben. I'm curious your take on this. But so I read. Oh, that's beautiful. Is that Broken Binding?
Oh, yeah.
What is that?
Yep, that's the Broken Binding's own published version of Blood and Fire, and I have not read it yet. But I am 1000% confident that I will love this series. So I have no problem getting some special editions. Yeah.
I keep hassling Broken Binding, and I'm like, let me do a sponsorship with you. You don't even have to send me any money. Just give me some books every now and then, and I'll do whatever you want.
Yeah,
and they keep giving me like, yeah, check back later. I read. I'm always reading one physical book and one audiobook. And so I do audio when I'm driving, doing chores around the house, or playing like easy video games, like things that don't require a lot of brain power, like platformers and stuff like that. But outside of that, I read one book. What about you, Ben? What do you do?
That's very sane. That makes a lot of sense. I also love having a print book going for when I'm just like home, have some time. I've just got a Kindle actually, so I want to start using that more because I'm out of space on my shelf and can save money that way as well. But I am a little bit less sane than you with the audio because I usually don't like doing more than one book at a time, whether that's audio or print. I just like being in the zone with one story and one book. And so I will have the same audio of whatever print book I'm also reading. Like, so I go from reading at home, and then when I go on a walk or I'm in the car, I'm turning on the audio with exactly like where I left off. And I just continue on in that book. So I never leave that book until
How do you sync up?
Oh, it doesn't take long. Like I'll usually try to stop in print at the end of chapters. So I'll just go, oh, I'm in chapter 19, and then I just click right to start at chapter 19 in the Audible app file. So syncing up is actually not hard at all. And if I'm in the middle of a chapter, it doesn't even take long to just like guess at where I am and then just rewind until I'm like, oh, yep, I'm here. That was a little bit of a pain, but not too much.
Wait, so are you using Audible, Ben? Is that what you do?
Yeah, so I use Audible mostly because I buy like the most amount of credits you can, like 24 per year. And so each credit usually only costs me around $10 instead of like the $15 that a lot of people do if they're just getting like one credit a month. And then over the years, I've just jumped on, they do so many sales where it's like 2 for 1, or they just do sales where stuff costs like $6 or less. And I will pick up on sale anything that I know is on my TBR. And so I have like this crazy Audible library with tons of things that I haven't read yet, but are on my TBR. So I stock up when it's on sale. And then I also look on Libby to see in my own Libby app, like what is on my TBR or what I think I'm only probably listened to once. So like for like things like live ship traders, I did those on Libby and didn't pay for the audiobooks and was able to get those on Libby whenever I wanted. Same with the Rainwall Chronicles, actually. So like, so when I can save some money, do it that way. But I also like, I've done that in the past, and then in the future when I've wanted to like just randomly re-listen or reread stuff and I didn't have it, I was like, oh, that's annoying. I wish I would have had that Audible. Like I did a re-listen to Dresden Files, and those can be popular on Libby. I know you do like some maneuvering with like lots of different memberships to different libraries, so you probably have less trouble getting stuff on Libby.
I haven't bought a book in like 3 years.
That's amazing. I love it.
I've saved thousands.
Yeah. I've contributed a lot of of money to the Jeff Bezos fund.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a bad friend to the author community because I just totally.
But
yeah,
I believe that authors do get there is some payment. I think when books get bought through libraries and borrowed through Libby, I do think there's some kind of compensation. I'm not sure about how that works though.
Yeah, I don't know. There's got to be something, right? Like, or at least they on the front end when they give books there, they've got to get some sort of compensation.
I think so, and you also, like, as a YouTuber, as a booktuber with a big following and doing reviews of most of what you read, like, you have less to be guilty about because if you are getting books to the library for free and spreading word of mouth about the books, like that's doing much more for that author than if you were just a single person in isolation kind of reading and borrowing it from the library.
Well, the one thing I do that I think is helpful is that if a book is not at my library, I'll go tell my library to go buy it, and they always buy it.
Yeah. So right then and there, yeah, you're helping the author for sure.
Somebody's paying for it.
But
so we got another
do
question.
Have a bit of like a collector's kind of like addiction. Like I like accumulating physical books, and I don't know. It's just I love having them on the shelf, and I love being able to actually like flip through the books, and especially if there's illustrated editions or things like that, or beautiful covers like this one. Like that enhances my experience with it enough where it's usually worth it to me to spend the money.
Yeah, I did have that same kind of addiction, but I am also married, and my wife eventually said, "You're not getting any more bookshelves, so get rid of books." And that's totally like against my philosophy. And so I was like, I guess I'm getting a Kindle.
No, my wife has mentioned multiple times about like, oh, like, can you sell the ones you're not using, or after you read them, can you sell them? And I was like, well, I might want to read them again in the future. No, I'm hearing some things from the wife on that front for sure. Oh,
yeah, because like if I was single, I would just I'd fill up the house with books. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But it is what it is. So got a question here about if I'm liking Project Hail Mary so far. Ben, I don't know if you've read this, but I have a review coming soon, so I don't want to talk too much about it. But I will say that
I have read it. I actually have not read it from the print because I got this after the fact because I did it fully on audio. I think you're doing it fully on audio, right?
I'm doing audio, yeah.
And Ray Porter, I mean, most people say the audiobook is amazing. There's a very book specific reason why the audiobook is maybe the ideal way to experience this story. But Porter himself, I just put out my my most recent favorite audiobook narrators video.
Yeah, like 6 through 10, right?
Just today, and Porter was on there very high. So I've listened to many dozens of narrators and thousands of hours of audiobooks at this point, and Porter's one of my favorites. He is so perfect for this type of kind of nerdy, sardonic kind of POV character who's like the scientist. Like he does it in the 𝗏𝘅𝑒 series amazingly, and so I thought he's perfect for this specific book, and for reasons that we shouldn't mention, the audio.
I didn't realize those. Everyone told me that, and then finally when it happened, I was like, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, in the book where that stuff, like, it's interesting what they do in the book, but you don't get to hear what you do during the audiobook, which adds so much. Oh my god, this book as a standalone, easily one of my favorites of all time. I actually haven't read that many standalones in general, because so many things in modern fantasy and sci-fi are series, or sci-fantasy, which is I haven't done too much like just hard sci-fi stuff. But this blew me away. Like I'd seen the movie The Martian, so I knew that I liked that, and I liked that kind of story. And then I think this was just a huge leveling up. And I actually went back and reread The Martian in print, and I like that still. But the way this does an amnesia plot, where we start and the main POV has amnesia, and then there's flashbacks that are filling us in on the memory, as just that structure, it worked so well for me. This is one of the books where I think I was most gripped to the experience, where I was so emotionally invested, did not want to stop. like I love when I have that kind of read where I am just fully like outside of myself, immersed in the story, not worrying about my own life, the world, and just caring about what's happening in here and giving me actually an emotional experience. Because I don't get too emotional in daily life too much. So I actually like when, watching a TV show or movie or reading a book and I'm having strong emotions. It's one of the reasons I really love reading. And this book,
yeah, I can't tell yet if I'm liking it or loving it, but it's somewhere in that realm. But I will say that I'm very invested in it, and I'm doing like this buddy read on my Discord, and I'm having to go slow because I like to slow the buddy read down to like 40 pages per day, which I think is a kind of sweet spot for people. But I read more than that. And so I'm having to break my own rule, and I'm like, pretty early on in the day, getting to that 40 pages, and then going and doing another book.
Oh man, come on, limiting yourself to 40 pages per day on Project Hail Mary. That's
hard,
like actual torture for me.
There was a moment that happens that's pretty dramatic. That was the end of that day, and I'm like, oh my god. So, yeah, but I am very much liking it.
Oh, very much liking it. Yeah, I'm glad. You used to say like you're mostly fantasy, but I wanted to break that trend a little bit with getting into Sun Eater, and I'm glad that has been such a huge hit. But so some of sci-fi really is more like fantasy. Like it reads more like traditional fantasy. That like Red Rising, Sun Eater, to me like they feel more like fantasy books than a lot of things we would think of as just pure sci-fi.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I'm coming to really understand more why fantasy and sci-fi is bunched together, in bookstores and stuff. Like even the hard sci-fi books, there's a lot of similarity between what there is to like about fantasy and what there is to like about sci-fi. I still think I like the average fantasy book more than the average sci-fi book, but there's a lot of wonderful sci-fi out there.
Yeah, like I love the whole Expanse series, and this doesn't read. I wouldn't call the sci fantasy to any extent of the imagination. It's more like hard sci-fi, but near future. But the type of story it is, the overcoming great odds and found family, and it's a lot of things that you often do find in those fantasy epics pop up in the Expanse as well. And but yeah, I've been loving both genres. It was actually the Three Body Problem trilogy, the Remembrance of Earth's Past, is the thing that reinvigorated my whole reading life back in like 2017. I was just getting to a point. It was after college. I was working, like I was just reading almost like a few books a year. Like I was, my reading habit was just like on life support, and reading some like literary fiction, a lot of more like depressing style books and nonfiction, and just a lot of random stuff, and it wasn't really just connecting with me, keeping me coming back. But then Remembrance of Earth's Past like got me so alive with reading.
God, it's so good, isn't it?
Oh my god, and it wasn't book one even. It was book one had me intrigued, but it was Dark Forest that like brought me alive in a way I hadn't been with reading in a while. And then
I still have to read. I still have to read the third one, but I'll tell you, I'm a little shook by the Dark Forest.
Yeah, like I'm no joke. Yes.
Like
book three won't help with that, by the way. Like
I mean,
like Death's End. Do you see the title? Death's End.
Yeah. I mentioned this somewhere else. I don't know if it was on a live or whatever, but I went out to dinner with my wife the day I finished that book. Dark Forest, and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I read this book and it's really messing with my head." And she's like, "Tell me about it." And I told her about it, and then she's like, "Why did you tell me about that?" And ever since, she's been walking around, and I see her like looking up at the sky, and I'm like, "Yeah."
No, before Three Body, I was like, "Oh, cool, first contact." Coming in contact with other intelligences, that would be so interesting and be so cool. Now it has me thinking a lot more about how things could go down. Now No, you're right. It really, like, the end of that book, from the teardrop stuff through to the end, some of the most like electrifying, horrifying, like amazingly engaging stuff I ever read up to that point. And then, oh, okay, this is funny. I actually was planning to going on a trip with my wife to Taiwan. At that moment that I just finished 𝐒𝐵ody Problem, and I thought on this trip I would just bring like a print copy of The Dark Forest, and you know I didn't have a Kindle, so I was like, okay, I can travel with this big book, and that'll probably get me through the trip. And I devoured this like throughout my free time on the trip, and any spare moment where back at the hotel and whatnot. And so I was left with like a bunch of days left on this trip without 𝐻𝑠's End. So I just got the Kindle version of 𝐻𝑠's End and read it on my phone throughout the rest of the trip. And, like,
that is commitment.
Like staying up late into the night and just like scrolling on my phone Kindle app. And it was amazing. Like 𝐻𝑠's End just continued the awesomeness from The Dark Forest. These two books are two of my favorites of all time. And I love the story so much that within a year of finishing, I went back and reread just these two, actually. I didn't feel the desire, the need to reread book one, but I had an amazing time with it all over again a second time within a year. That's how much I loved these two.
Awesome, man.
Oh my god,
yeah, dude,
some amazing, incredible things happen. Like, I can't wait to get to this. Like, one chapter in here, just one of my favorite things I've ever read. Just so good. But that got me back into just like wanting to devour reading and realizing, oh my god, like I can have similar experiences to what I had with like Harry Potter growing up, where it just like consumed my life.
Yeah.
And I am like, more than watching a great TV show or movie or playing a video game, like I feel more fulfilled reading a gripping book than anything else that, you know, I could be doing as a hobby in my free time. And then my friend that I was staying over at his apartment in Manhattan when I was working there, he had never stopped reading fantasy. He like read A Song of Ice and Fire. Like after, you know, we went our separate ways in high school, he just continued reading. I stopped reading fantasy and he just continued. I should have continued. He was into Brandon Sanderson, and I just had this mental block against fantasy. Like I had this notion that it was like for kids, like sci-fi is like for adults. Like there's classic sci-fi, it's literary. And he tried to get me to read Mistborn, and I was like, I picked it up the first page and it said like ash fell from the sky, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is so fantasy, not for me. So I read the Old Man's War series, which he had in his apartment by John Scalzi, and that was just very mediocre. Yeah. And then I was there one night and there wasn't anything else to read besides A Song of Ice and Fire, which I didn't really want to get into, or Mistborn. And so I just gave Mistborn a go. And by the end of the first chapter, I let myself go with the suspension of disbelief. And I was so hooked. I just then binged all the 𝐒𝐿ZHMIR books that were out in 2018. All Mistborn Era 1, 3 books, Mistborn Era 2, Warbreaker, Elantris, first 3 Stormlight books. And then I was like, oh my god, I made such a big mistake giving up on fantasy as a teenager. Yeah. Like this is my home where I belong. And so I've been spending the last 5 years catching up with all this other stuff. You know, First Law, John Gwynne, Malazan, Wheel of Time, Song of Ice and Fire I just finished reading this year and loved. But the letting myself like just go for those experiences that are thrilling, and you know, letting myself get lost in like very imaginative worlds with you know, things where you can put your heart into them. Unlike a lot of like heavy realistic literary fiction, you know, there's just it's a lot of depressing, you know, reflections of the real world, and it just has been so enlivening veering towards fantasy and sci-fi for me. And it was so interesting to see the reaction to your Blood Meridian review, because I tried reading Blood Meridian because I've been hearing about it for so many years. Like I read the Kindle preview that you can read a bunch of pages on Amazon, and I couldn't get through just like a few pages. I'm like, I'm not having fun trying to muddle through this. Like, it's just why I'm reading right now is for fun, for having emotional experiences, for wanting to be engaged. It's a hobby, and watching people be so snooty and pretentious in the comments, like, how dare you, want to be entertained while reading? Like, I was defending it in the comments and mentioning, like, this isn't why I'm interested in my reading hobby right now. But if I were back in college and wanting to, take a more analytical and academic approach, I think there would be so much there that might be of interest. But like, it's not what I'm doing right now for my reading hobby. And someone just said, like, reading hobby, like, LOL, like this can't be a hobby that we do in our spare time for fun, to take a load off and enjoy ourselves.
Well, I would counter it too. Like, look, if you like Blood Meridian, which most people do, more power to you, because books are subjective, and what one person loves, one person might hate. That's totally fine. But like, if I wanted to go study a book, I'd just go read 𝐿azin again, and have both worlds, and just actually enjoy what I'm reading while I'm also dissecting it. But whatever. I actually had to. So I've been getting so many negative comments still. Like, every day I get some sort of hate comment on that video, and I have gotten such a kick out of them. It's like one of the best parts of my day is watching people get so riled up over this thing. But people just started actually getting kind of like aggressive on, like,
ooh, yeah.
And so I had to turn off the comments today, actually, because I'm like, this is getting kind of weird and past the point of fun. So
yeah,
whatever.
You would hope that readers of serious literature would just be a little bit more enlightened, like that. That reading this kind of literature would help them, think through, other people's perspectives and other ways of viewing the world. And you would, and usually BookTube, as I've experienced it, is an extremely positive and supportive and awesome,
like, overwhelmingly nice.
Yeah. But I guess it does make sense that people go to reading for different reasons, and that certain authors, certain books might attract subset of readers who have trouble envisioning other people's opinions that are different and reasons for reading. And there's not much that we can do to argue against that. It's probably
no, but I mean, it's got to be something about the fantasy BookTube community, and maybe maybe that's not it, but like, if I were to go flame a Brandon Sanderson book, which I have done, and I love Brandon Sanderson to bits, but I've disliked some of his books, and I've said very loudly that I hate some of his books, and I'll get people commenting, being like, "Oh man, I can't disagree more. Love the opinion. Here's why I disagree," which is a beautiful comment. That's how discussion is born. But I say, well, there's got to be a genre thing on it. I don't know what it is, but maybe
I do think there is, because I think in general, to make a broad generalization, that there's kind of divisions within the larger fiction reading community, between the people that basically have walled themselves off from kind of fantasy, most sci-fi, except for the occasional sci-fi or fantasy that somehow crosses over into the literary world. That's magical realism, or I guess if it's old enough, like 1984 or something like that, then it's acceptable. But for some reason, at a certain point, and I think I fell prey to this myself, so I can understand it a little bit. It's that, and no one told me that I needed to leave fantasy behind, but I just had this sense as I went to college that I was supposed to, to be serious, intellectual, that you got to hit classics, you got to concentrate on literary fiction. And man, I read some terrible, just like contemporary literary fiction novels in that time, along with some really great classics as well. But I think there's a complete and utter lack of respect that some people have towards a lot of genre fiction, and they view it as less intellectual, less worthy, lower quality, and it's very pretentious, and I think allows them to feel superior. And maybe I think there's a little cognitive dissonance involved, like they're missing out on all these fun experiences we're having, and so to justify that to themselves, they they have to view all of this as inferior, and not worthy of their time. And I get it, because I feel like I was kind of in that mindset for a long time, where I just had no clue what was going on in the fantasy community. It didn't even occur to me to seek out fantasy books for a long time. And
Well,
I think
I mean,
people in the
I
fantasy
think there's
community,
also
though,
this,
yeah,
but I think there's this component somewhere, and maybe I'm totally off on this, but I find that there's a lot of themes to fantasy books that resonate or that are continual. That, and I'm sure this exists in other genres, but the themes of like compassion and forgiveness and understanding other perspectives is so routinely brought up in fantasy books that I can't help but have that rub off on me, and I imagine that
yeah,
rubs off on other people the same way. I mean,
yeah,
I find that the more I've read in fantasy, the more like the better person I am in terms of how I deal with other people. I mean, like I work in a world in politics, where it is bitterly divisive and, people hate each other. And the more that I've read in this, the more I've personally come to the realization of like, look, these are people that I disagree with, but they're amazing people and I love them. And I love that they have other ideas, and I just don't happen to agree with them. But man, I would love to hang out with this person and talk about their beliefs and understand them. And it's made me, understand myself more and just be a nicer person, I think.
yeah. No, I think there's a lot there that I totally agree with. I think multi POV stories are actually much rarer in the literary fiction world. I think they're often just single POV. I think there's also a feeling I've gotten in reading a lot of literary fiction that a lot of the POVs are just kind of like author stand-ins. They feel like thinly veiled kind of aliases for the author themselves. And it's a lot about working through just like internal psychology and making sense of the world around them and their place in the world. And often, there's a lot of cynicism but in fantasy, there's, I think, more of an optimistic, empathetic kind of heart to a lot of fantasy books, and getting inside lots of different POVs and inhabiting, the same conflict, the same setting from different POVs, I think really helps us do lots of different perspective taking and empathizing. And so, Erickson is amazing at that, obviously, but Sanderson is great at that too. Like in the Stormlight Archive, just getting POVs from the humans and the 𝗏𝗁𝗏𝐿𝐴 and things like that. I think they do exercise our perspective taking muscles a lot. And so I think just by virtue of what type of books we're reading, and even Joe Abercrombie books, like I'm thinking of the First Law trilogy. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of real world kind of social reflections and cynicism throughout that, but there's also a lot of characters who are trying to be better, to grow, to transcend the kind of nastiness of their world and make it better and be better. And they're really beautiful character arcs and moments throughout even the First Law trilogy, where people are struggling to do good and to be better. And so even in fantasy where like that's considered grimdark, I think there's still a lot of great empathizing that goes on through those stories and series. And maybe the fact of them being series where you get to spend these long journeys with characters too, in ways that you don't often in literary fiction in these like shorter standalones. You don't get to inhabit characters through these many years and through all different stages of their journey and character arc, and go on these long heroes journeys. Or so yeah, I do think there's something about the nature of fantasy that does maybe help it make us more empathetic. But I also think that just by the nature of people giving up their pretensions of sticking to what is considered great literature, of just like being honest with ourselves about reading what we like, what feels fulfilling and enriching, that the fantasy community in general just attracts less say pretentious, but snooty, like the words where people are just condescending towards others. They're I think just the community attracts people who, you know, are less like that in the first place, and so there's a kind of nice filtering that's going on.
Yeah, agreed. I want to mention to everybody watching this that like I've now realizing there's been like hundreds of comments that are flowing through, and I'm not trying to ignore you, but I've been friends with Ben for a long time on BookTube, and I've never got a chance to like talk to him in person. So I'm very excited. We like a lot of the same stuff, so I'm kind of ignoring a lot of comments here. I apologize, but I won't always be like that. But I am kind of that is what I'm doing. I did want to mention this comment though. Are you guys thought about reading something like The Fourth Wing that's romantic-y and get a lot of hype around it to be able to react to it? So I am, yes, but not on my own. So my wife never reads fantasy. She doesn't really read books. She listens to audiobooks, but like she's a therapist, and so she reads like therapy books. But her best friend reads all the romance fantasy books that have existed. So she tried to get into some Sarah J. Maas, didn't love it, but she's now reading The Fourth Wing, and she's I think she's going to stick to it. And I've told her that if she finishes it, I'm going to read it, and then we'll talk about it together. And
I would love your Fourth Wing reaction. Yeah.
So that might, I don't know if it's going to happen, but if she finishes the book, I will go and fly through Fourth Wing as fast as I can, so I don't have to read it for too long, and then give a review for it.
Yeah,
so.
I figure that'll be a fast read, but that'd be fun. I think with your wife having read it, you could just bond over, you know, knowing the story and the characters, shared kind of experience there. That's fun. My wife doesn't read fiction really. So I met my wife while I was teaching English actually at a university in Vietnam, and she was an English teacher, and we were kind of assigned to be co-teachers. And reading fiction is just not a big part of current Vietnamese culture, and but English is not her first language, but she's actually enjoyed reading some of my old Goosebumps books and Disney books. So she can get into books, but it just has to be the right one and at the right kind of reading level. But yeah, it would be cool to read the same things. Like when my wife and I have had this like same experience of like watching Lord of the Rings and loving it. Like that's fun. We can bond over that. Or One Piece recently, the live action. We both had a great time watching that.
Nice.
Yeah. But I have too many things on my TBR. I have thousands of things. I don't, if I don't think I'm gonna like it, I don't have much of a motivation to do it.
Yeah, I have broadly said that to all my family members. If you read a fantasy book, then I'm going to read it too, and we're going to review it. So nice. I will, at some point in the future, be doing a Harry Potter review with my 7-year-old. And we'll see what our thoughts are. And have a little 38-year-old and a 7-year-old doing a review together.
Oh, that'll be fun. I don't have any kids, but one of the things that almost makes me wish, you know, I did have kids would be to bond over, you know, something like Harry Potter together. My nieces and nephews have enjoyed Harry Potter at various points, and as my nephews are growing older, like, you know, one of them started to read The Wheel of Time. He didn't get very far into it, but it was fun to, you know, see him try to go through a couple of the first books.
I mean, I feel like one of my jobs as a dad is to get my kids to get into the same things as I am, so then I get to do the things I love to do all the time. And so I've successfully got them into video games, which was not hard. So we get to play video games together, and I've successfully got them into like board games and card games, and that's a win. If I can get them into reading fantasy books, then I'll hit the trifecta, and I'll just get to have fun every night. And
reading side by side,
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
No,
I mean, I'll read if my kids are reading fantasy books. I don't care what age group it is. I'll read that. I'll read everything they'll read, and I'd love to read the same thing they're reading and talk to them about it and try to inspire that passion.
Ryan Wegner asked a question. We chatted about this at the beginning, but he just finished Best Served Cold. So you're at a great point in the first lot to just drop it, because the next book, The Heroes, Abercrombie calls those 3 books, Best Served Cold, The Heroes, and Red Country, 3 standalones. I mean, there are tiny threads of interconnection, but that is a great point in the series to just like drop the books, read other things, and come back to them. But I will say, I personally get the most out of my series when I binge them fully, just back to back. So I did the first law when I read that the first the first 7 books were out, and I read all 7 books back to back, and I do find, I know that's not for everyone, and people get tired of the same authorial voice, spending time with the same characters, like that gets very tiring for people, and I know that's not for everyone, but for me, I prize immersion. So like when I can just easily sink in to the story and the setting and be visualizing everything and be there. And
Yeah.
the more that I'm just spending time with one author in one setting, one set of characters, the more I'm immersed and all the details are as fresh as can be. And so it depends on what you value when you read. And if immersion like that is super valuable, then just give yourself permission to binge, and that's okay. And you'll get to other things later. It might take you more time to get to more authors, but that's fine. But also, if you want to get to other authors quicker, and you don't feel the need to binge and be immersed fully with that, then switching it up and rotating is great too. But specifically now after Best Served Cold is a great time to
great time, perfect time. You can take your time with the next 2. But I would binge the last trilogy. There's a lot going on there. Yeah. It'd be good to kind of keep those threads going. And if you're not doing it, Ryan, get these on audiobook.
Yeah. Oh, Pacey's the goat. He's the best.
Yeah, man. I ruined myself because when I first started getting into audiobooks, I went on Reddit and I asked like a question. And I was like, "Hey, I've never read a fantasy audiobook before. What's the top hits?" And so the first thing I did was The First Law. And I've never found an audiobook narrator that I've liked more than that one.
Yeah, no.
It's like having a Lamborghini in your first car.
Yeah. He's a level of genius and like a savant at this specific artistic skill that's like the equivalent of like LeBron James in basketball, like Michael Jordan, like where just maybe the single human that is the best at this one skill or art, and just is just a pleasure to spend time with, watching the master at work. Like I once saw an interview that he did with Joe Abercrombie. Also, like Joe Abercrombie's really witty and Stephen Pacey is really witty, and like I've seen a couple interviews with both of them, and they just have like a great banter back and forth. And Pacey just really respects Abercrombie and loves the writing in the books, which is great. And Abercrombie is just in awe of Pacey. So watching their interviews were a lot of fun. But he actually did a live reading from, was it The Trouble with Peace or Wisdom of Crowds? I can't remember which book from the last trilogy, but he was going back and forth. Like he didn't stumble at all. He was going back and forth between a couple character voices where I might have thought like in recording, he might have paused and like, switched characters, kind of taken a moment to switch characters and get a different voice ready between, like I don't even want to say the character, but a character with a really gruff, gravelly voice, and then a younger female character in the north. And he was switching between them instantaneously, and watching him do it live was amazing. Like I couldn't even believe it. That interview with Jay from Caption and Words actually I think was up on YouTube, but they took out the live reading when they put it on YouTube. It was like a publisher event that I was lucky enough to be able to see live, but they took out the live reading for some reason before they posted it on YouTube. I don't think there's any live reading of him available that you can see, but he's amazing. I've actually found one audiobook narrator that can rival him for
Who's that?
The performance that is put into every line, and the overall kind of vibe is as similar to Pacey as I've ever found, and I've listened to a lot. The problem is it's not fantasy, so I don't know if you're going to be too interested, but Rupert Farley, who is also this kind of like older, grizzled British like actor who's like Pacey, just like been in a million like TV and theater things like in England. And he doesn't do too many different things, but he does narrate the Sharp historical fiction series from Bernard Cornwell. And like, as far as audio quality, if you want something that can match Pacey's brilliance, this is the closest you'll come. Like Sharpe's Tiger is the first book chronologically. It takes place in India. Those 3 books in India are awesome. Like Cornwell wrote them in the 90s when he was just
okay.
at his
So
peak.
I'm gonna be reading those books sometime. So I got to go audio on those then.
Oh my God. Yes. It's
okay, cool,
spectacular. Like Pacey level, good. Like Farley, and he's great at accents too. And so in the series, you get in India you get all different kinds of British accents from everywhere around the UK and Ireland and Scotland, and higher class, upper crust British, and then lower class British, and in a lot of Indian accents as well. He's so immersive with the accents, but it's that performance quality that is something that I've only ever encountered in Pacey that Farley also has, and he has like a similar background to Pacey too, which I find interesting. But yeah, those audios are also spectacular.
Sweet. I'm gonna shoot that up my TBR then, because I've been looking for some good audiobooks.
Yeah, they're the best.
That's awesome. I've been listening to First Law again. I'm going through my reread of them on audio, and it's inspired me that when I'm reading books to my daughter and my son, I do all these crazy voices now. And they're both like, "Daddy, you're so good at voices," and I'm like, "Girl, you don't even know."
Yeah,
I got nothing.
I think most people who aren't voice actors, like, they're just barely changing their voice for different characters. And so yeah, if you're making any effort to distinguish voices, like that would be great.
My female voices sound like a Monty Python female voice, which is not great. Not great.
There's a hot question here about, does Lord of the Rings stand? Oh, sorry, you were going.
No. Oh God.
I grew up watching the movies and loving them. So the movies were my experience of the story.
Yeah.
And
yeah, me too.
When I tried a few years ago to pick up, I tried as a kid. I liked The Hobbit. I enjoyed The Hobbit as a kid. And then I tried to move on from that and pick up Fellowship of the Ring. And I made it into the chapter with Tom Bombadil and just like quit right there. I tried picking it up a few years ago. And I was like, okay, if I just make it through Tom Bombadil, I know where the story's going. Like, if I get to Rivendell, things are going to pick up from there. The Mines of Moria. But the Fellowship of the Ring, it was just a matter of like, everywhere we got, there wasn't that much anything interesting going on. And then during the journey, it wasn't that interesting. And then I was like, okay, when we just get to here, it'll get interesting. And then the Council of Elrond did, okay, this wasn't too interesting, but maybe where we're going next. And I was just bored throughout. Like, I'm not into this right now. I'm not into reading for, loving language. Like, I would read poetry if that was really something I love. Like, I don't particularly get much joy out of, elegant, beautiful prose or descriptions of nature. I read Walden by Thoreau, and I don't think I'm ever going to get better nature descriptions than I got in that book. And I want, an engaging plot and characters I can, kind of relate to or just, root for or root against. And I just found myself kind of bored by Lord of the Rings, and just not the kind of story I'm used to with all these, faster paced modern fantasy books, which do characters and plotting differently. So I think people love them now, but they're just not the kind of stories I want to be reading.
Well, yeah. And so Ryan had a follow-up comment about, would they take out the impact they've had? Would they still stand up on today's standards? I say no. And I've made this claim before, and I always will say that the people that love the Lord of the Rings read them when they were kids.
Yeah,
and
that's what I think.
That nostalgia hit.
Tons of nostalgia, yeah.
And I respect that, but they don't admit that. And so every time I've always said that Lord of the Rings would not hold up today's standards, I get people saying like, no. And then I always go, when did you read it? And they always say they read it when they were kids. And it's just, it's too much of a connection. I mean, they're just not, it's such a different style. And I love that the books came out and allowed me to have the passion that I have today. And because it wouldn't exist in the same format, but it's just, there's no way if those books came out today that they would get any attention at all. I mean, you'd get people that are like wowed by the fact that there's these languages that this guy went into insane depth to do it, but there's no way that they'd be a hit.
Yeah, the fact that it was so influential and it has survived, like that, it does say a lot for the quality and what those books were like for readers, as they became really popular. But like, there's a comment here about a lot of the modern series. Will they be around 50 years from now talking about it? Like, maybe not. Like, I love The Faithful and the Fallen. Will lots of people be reading it in 50 years? Like, I would probably doubt it, but I don't care. Like, what I care about is, am I enjoying myself now? Is it enriching my current life? And I have very limited finite time here on this planet Earth. I have even
Yeah.
more limited free time when I'm not working or, doing family obligation stuff. And I'm not caring at all, like, how influential something will be, in the future. I care how much I'm getting out of it right now. Like, that's what's important to me.
Yeah, that's
I
the only way you can
appreciate
do
that.
it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I look at it and I say, let's look at something similar to Lord of the Rings, different but similar. And I look at something like, let's pick The Bound and the Broken, right? Got some similar structure to it, this epic story and the way that the journey quest happens. And if you took two people and said, go read The Bound and the Broken and go read The Lord of the Rings and tell me which one's better, there is no way that a single person on earth would say that Lord of the Rings is better than Bound of the Broken, in my opinion.
I mean, they might, just with personal taste, vary so much, and people have surprising tastes all the time. But
yeah, that's true.
I think you're on something, which is, our taste in storytelling, changes as cultures change, as storytelling evolves. Just those things shift, and it's okay if we don't enjoy things that are very old. Like, I don't have much desire to go see Shakespeare plays on the stage, or to read them for that matter. And like, those are some of the biggest classics in our literary canon, and have stood some of the longest test of time. But I'm just interested in certain things right now, with what kind of gets me gripped to stories. And I think it's also okay for people to love different things. But I agree with you, Matt, that I do think, especially Lord of the Rings, is something that a lot of people do get exposure to when they're younger, and then combine that with love of the movies, and there's just this overall nostalgia, and considering like Tolkien the father of modern fantasy. And I think there's a lot of things that contribute to the love of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, that are not just like, how engaging is the series now to sit down with. But
and I don't think it's like slander to say that I don't love them. I don't think it should be a shock to anybody that something might not be as good as something when it came out 80 years before it. People learn, they adapt, and they refine over time. There's no way that something can hold up, that long and not end up getting surpassed by something. But
yeah, and just language changes too over time. Just I like being able to sink so easily into stories. So I know a lot of people don't read for immersion, which is often what I'm looking for. And they're more analytical when they read, and they're usually like thinking about the text as they read. And I try to just sink into the story and not have my own thoughts. Like, I actively want to basically dissociate from myself, my own mind, my analytical mind, and just experience the story, through the narrator, through the POV characters. And it's easier for me to do that with more recent things, because the language is tuned just to our modern linguistic sensibilities. And it's why reading a Shakespeare play for me is the complete opposite of immersion. And I'm struggling almost every line just to figure out, like, okay, what was exactly the meaning here? What was this wordplay? What was this symbol? That's not giving me the same joy as when I'm just sinking in to Joe Abercrombie or John Gwynne. But I still can appreciate really sophisticated, elegant use of language, like with Raccio and Hobb. So I like experiencing variety as well. in a variety of styles. It keeps things fresh. And certain authors, like Эрikson, came up as a literary like short story writer. Like he's paying more attention to his like individual word choices and sentence construction and the flow of words on the page. Probably much more so than Sanderson is. And so it's cool to experience different authors, and it's nice to be able to get immersed with authors like that who are paying more attention to the prose, like 𝐒𝐬𝐢𝐚𝐥. But it's very impressive too, like 𝐒𝐬𝐢𝐚𝐥 and 𝐄𝐮, where they do have some elegant prose, but I find it still easy to sink into the story. Like I love that. But I love sinking into a Sanderson story just as much, where he's not using as many sophisticated words, and his editors have told him like he can't use words like miasma. I heard him say that once in a live stream, and I'm like, that stinks that you can't use the full extent of the language that that you want to express yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to cultivate a particular audience as wide as possible. So yeah, that's a bit of a shame, but I don't feel like I'm missing out on that much when I'm reading Stormlight Archive. That he's not
agreed.
Using very sophisticated
language. I mean, I find prose to be a nice add-on, but it's definitely not required for me to enjoy a book. And although you said something that I would almost jokingly challenge, in that somebody like Эрikson puts a lot of effort into the way that they write their things. Have you ever read like Facebook comments or like YouTube comments by Эрikson? They're like God level. It's like almost like this guy just thinks like he writes. He's actually wrote like YouTube comments on channels like nothing channels, and just happens to get tagged in the comments, and I'm like, God damn, this guy's good.
Essays. No, he has a great mind. One of the joys of reading for me is just spending time with a mind that I find interesting and engaging, that it's someone else who's had different life experiences and thinks differently, and they're communicating to me through their writing, and that's cool. There's this real one-to-one communication in books that you don't get through watching movies or TV shows, which are so much more collaborations. But Эрikson is just one of those really interesting intellectual minds. I saw him discussing with A.P. Canavan one chapter from Midnight Tides, and they were just breaking down one scene. It was a really intense, like, emotional scene with 𝐶𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿, I think is the character's name. And like Эрikson was from a book he had written like 10 years ago or longer, maybe. When was Midnight Tides? 15 years ago. He was discussing like his word choice in these sentences and why he was going with this word and the flow of this sentence into this sentence. And it was just amazing to listen to. And I know that's just not how Sanderson thinks about writing. I enjoy hearing Sanderson talk about his process, and it's just like word vomit onto the page for his first drafts, and then he loves the creative aspect of getting the scenes onto the page and what he envisioned and writing those scenes, and then he doesn't like a revision and like tidying things up. So like it's fun that different authors have different priorities and approaches, and I love the variety. But there's just so much awesomeness within the fantasy genre. I also don't really understand like the single fandom people, like because there's so many great, like I like people who are just dedicated to like one series, like, or the 𝐒𝐿𝐴. Like I love the 𝐒𝐿𝐴, but I don't really want to be spending all my free time theorizing about this fictional universe that Sanderson created. That doesn't really bring me too much joy. I'd be rather experiencing other series and stories and coming back to Sanderson's books every so often. And
I mean, as somebody who did have a single fandom for a while, I mean, I had a big break of reading, and then I read A Song of Ice and Fire. And at the time I thought, this is the peak of fiction, and I'll never read another fantasy series. I'm just going to read this one over and over. And I got so into it that I actually ended up like a moderator on the subreddit for A Song of Ice and Fire. And like, all I did was talk about this series. But then eventually I branched out, and I was like, God, I look back on it and I'm like, I wasted so much time when I could have just been, and nothing against Song of Ice and Fire. I love it dearly. And I'll read it again someday. But there's just so much out there. I feel like the people that have this are missing out.
It is cool though to dig that deep into it, because for something that is as rich as Song of Ice and Fire, like when I got exposed to some of the fan theories after I finished Dance with Dragons, like a million little tiny details and Easter eggs and possibilities that, you know, went over my head I didn't notice on my first read. Like with something as rich as A Song of Ice and Fire, like it is really cool to dig that deeply in. But I think you are missing out if you just, you know, just commit to almost like a single fandom. And I think it maybe encourages some unhealthy mindsets too. And I'm seeing it play out with the Wheel of Time fandom. So like people in the Wheel of Time fandom, like they had that series for so many years, but then, you know, Robert Jordan passed away before he could write more books. It's a shame because I would have loved to get, you know, his sequel series that he planned out across the ocean that he was thinking about, or the continuing the New Spring like prequel novellas with.
Wait, was he planning an Across the Ocean series?
Yeah.
Oh man, I wanted that so bad.
Continuing with some of the main characters from and like he had ideas for going out, and it's a shame. Like he passed away well before his time, and we do all miss out on, you know, probably some amazing books because of that. But like the people who are just, you know, they're not getting new books in that series. Like all they had to look forward to and put all their hopes and dreams and their fandom energy and passion now gets funneled into a TV show that's a different medium completely and created by not Robert Jordan and, you know, written by people that are not Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson. And I've just seen things play out around the show and the Wheel of Time fandom that did not seem terribly healthy. But you know, like I if you were that dedicated Wheel of Time fan, it's like you almost would have to convince yourself, unless you just like had really just strong negative reactions against the show. But I've seen a lot of Wheel of Time fandom not accepting what seemed like really legitimate criticisms of the show, and you know, even, you know, just the way Sanderson's criticisms of the show, you know, were trashed by the Wheel of Time fandom in some corners. Like it's interesting because, you know, like this their identity. I feel like super mega fans of one thing, like their identity gets really tied up maybe in that story and that fandom, and you just cannot handle, you know, outside criticism. That's I think there's a lot of negatives to just like having tunnel vision on one fandom for like one property or one piece of art. I've never understood it. Like I love Star Wars growing up, but I was never interested in, you know, I would see the movies as they would come out, but never consider myself like, you know, a Star Wars complete nerd or geek. Like I loved watching all different kinds of movies, and the closest I came was probably with Harry Potter and reading some like fan fiction and listening to some podcasts between the book releases. But once it was done, like I pretty much moved on. And yes, the what's going on with the Wheel of Time is unfortunate. But I would.
Well, you mentioned something
like,
that I see this play out a lot on something like Goodreads, which I'm very active on. And that when a new book comes out for a big series, the people that finish it first are the mega fans. And so you'll see the scores for a new, very popular book be off the charts. And then it has to get equalized. It starts coming down when everybody else reads it. And so you read those comments and they're almost funny. It's like they discount every possible problem with these books. And they just say, it's the best thing I've ever read. It's amazing. It's perfect. And then reality hits, right? When the actual people that are reading this, because they're not obsessed with it. And then, you know, it kind of.
And the key there is just to be always recognized with art. I mean, most things in life are subjective, but specifically with art and aesthetic taste, like it's entirely subjective. And so like when I initially read Rhythm of War, like really quickly on release, like I read two of my favorite series came out with new releases within the past few years, like Battleground with the Dresden Files and Rhythm of War. Like I devoured them, read them, you know, right after release very, very quickly. And loves both of them. Just the kind of reads where I'm getting fully immersed. My analytical brain is turned off. I'm not looking for plot holes. I'm just completely sunk into the story and having emotional experiences. And when I'm immersed, engaged the whole way through and actually getting a little bit emotional, then that to me is just a great book for me. And 5-star easy, maybe one of my favorite books. And like that was my mega fan experience. And then later, as lots of people are reading these books a little bit more slowly, or a little bit after the release, and I'm seeing lots of people feeling like, oh, didn't love this in Battleground, and I can understand it. Like I'm not threatened. My identity is not threatened by other people not liking what I loved, when it's completely something that's down to subjective taste. And so it's so interesting because I've seen so many different criticisms of Rhythm of War, especially like around, getting too deep into, this fictional scientific magic system, and like long stretches like that, or flashback sequences that were, not very impactful, which I would agree with. Like a lot of the criticisms, I could be like, my analytical self is like, yeah, that makes sense. That does seem valid. But when I read it, I didn't mind. And so I don't get angry or mad when those people have different experiences with things I love. You just have to have recognition that it's all subjective. But then again, when a read comes along that feels like it's so bad, so I want to bring up The First Binding. Like I feel like it was so bad. I was in such misery reading all 817 pages of that thing, and then it's hard for me to wrap my mind around seeing like these other readers coming out loving it, and it's great. I'm glad they had great experiences. It's just so hard for me to grasp. And what's interesting about that one is that I had not read Kingkiller Chronicles, so having read Kingkiller Chronicle, like I feel like going to The First Binding, you have a completely different experience. I went in just fresh on this story. And so my issues with it have nothing to do with him copying any plot beats or character beats. I was just terribly bored. And this was an example where like I feel like prose did get in the way, where just I was noticing certain word choices and language use that was annoying me and kicking me out of my immersion, and just being bored in every section as we go into like a different plot section. It just left me completely bored and unengaged, and leading to one of the most just ridiculous endings I've ever read. Just and
it's so bad.
Yeah, but
no,
I feel like
so bad.
You were tainted. Like you couldn't experience like the story in its pure form. To like you have these other really legitimate gripes that I like. So like I feel like that was clouding your vision of the other possible negatives about the read.
It was, although I hated the book for itself, but it's one of the times where I do just flat out disagree with people, and I say like, you're wrong. When people tell me things like the book's good, no. And also when they say like, yeah, it borrows some from Kingkiller, and I know you can't speak to this, but I'm like, no, it's scene for scene the same book.
The things that I've seen people list out, a lot of the plot beats and character beats that are just like replicated from Kingkiller, and it's well beyond being inspired by. Like it's very specific situations that are too detailed. It's like, in the past there have been big trials about certain songs like borrowing like certain riffs or notes or like chord progressions from other songs. Like George Harrison got found like guilty of it with oh my god, what's that song? My Sweet Lord, one of his biggest songs. Okay. And he had like the chord progression was the same, I think, from the song I Feel Fine. And like that, I think, I don't know if that should have been made as big a deal as it was, like borrowing a chord progression. But like, if that is an issue in music of like, people accept being influenced, but like when it gets to a specific level of specificity with like a certain exact same chord change with the same kind of cadence to it, like that is what Verdi seems to have done as far as, because I've seen people lay out all the similarities, and it's almost hard for me to believe. But then again, I read the prologue to Kingkiller Chronicle, and then it became no longer hard for me to believe, because like, just the beginnings of the books seemed so exactly alike. Like it was just reskinned into a new setting. Like I couldn't believe it. And I was just reading the prologue.
Yeah, I listed out a ton of them, like dozens. And I love this one comment on YouTube, and I don't think they did it ironically, where they're like, yeah, well, you're flat out wrong on number 24. And I'm like, number 24? What about the other 50? It's just like, Ben, I don't know if you heard, but I don't want to say names because I don't want to hurt people's feelings, but I got invited to go be one of the judges on 𝗪𝗿𝐻 for the finals on one of the teams that are doing them. And I had this whole plan, and I'm like, I'm all excited about it. And I got these 10 books, and I'm going to read them. And then they came back, and they're like, oh, we just saw your review of the first binding. We're going to not have you be a judge anymore because you're a little too harsh on, these indie authors can't take the heat as much as, traditional authors are. And
I saw that, and
like,
I was,
all right.
That was, I was horrified by that, because the flip side of that, though, like that's more rare. Like you and me, we tend to, we try to love the books that we're reading. We want to enjoy ourselves. We want to have a good time. We're going in, we're giving stories the benefit of that. I often give books like a lot of pages to try to hook me in and get me engaged. Like an author has to do a lot of things to annoy me for me to like start to be pissed off and to want to put it down or to be hate reading it. Like the flip side is we also get really fiery and passionate about what we love, and we want to sing it to the rafters. And like, that's what indie books without big readerships need. Like they need people with, a soapbox with an audience to get out and sing their praises. And if the risk is that, you won't like it and will be harsh, like that seems like an acceptable risk. But as someone who's just a reader in the community, I want my reviewers that I look to be as brutally honest as possible. I'm not looking for objective analytical reviews of a book's merits, because I don't believe that those are really there to be found. I want to know your personal subjective experience. I want to know how engaged you were, what was generally like the emotional experience you had with it, and then getting a sense for reviewers I follow over time and seeing how my tastes align. Like I just want that brutal honesty. And I know a lot of people are similar, which is, why I think you've cultivated such a big audience, because, we all just love, we're, you just finished a book and we're getting your raw reaction. And we care so much about this that when we have a bad experience, like it's so disappointing. Like it's such a waste of my time. And I could be reading so many other things that are enriching my life and fun. And I do get pretty angry, like when I have a bad read. And, but as long as we recognize, though, that, that it's our experience, and we don't try to make sweeping generalizations about, it being revolutionary in the genre or moving the genre in the wrong direction. Like, I think being harsh and honest is usually a great thing. And it's a shame that they didn't take you there, because there was probably going to be a good chance like that you would enjoy most of those. Like a lot of the books you love are indie, are less polished. And so you are not one of these, snooty readers who need something to have that, highly polished, elegant prose to love. And so these are
my middle finger to the process is I think I'm still going to read them. And I think I'm still going to review them all. So
yes,
they can't stop me.
Yes. Yeah, no, you should. And that would help me, because I have such a big TBR. Like I rely on people that I feel like I do share a lot of taste with to be a filter. And, you tend to read a lot more authors than me, on a monthly, yearly basis. So it's great to, see stuff that are kind of on my radar or not even on my radar. And like Dungeon Crawler Carl, I haven't tried it yet, but that's something that I want to try. That something you put on my
definitely
radar.
Do audio for that.
Wandering in, maybe. Oh yeah. Can't. I saw like a little clip of the narrator doing it from his studio, and it was amazing. He did like a birthday call to like a fan of the series, and he used like the voices from the book, and it was incredible. I loved it. But yeah, I would love to see their views, but I bet if like, are you talking about just the 𝗪𝗿𝐻 finalists?
Yeah.
Like I would probably bet that you're gonna like most of those. Either way, it'll be interesting. Either way, it'll be interesting to me to see your opinion. And I also would bet that most of the authors, maybe not all, but most would appreciate you being as brutally harsh and honest as you would want to be. It is weird though that was the reason for non-inviting you. Just like you're too honest, too honest about your experience of the work. Like, yeah, that I don't understand that. That to me, I love being a positive person, but that to me is veering like towards like, ooh, like we want to be honest. That's like toxic positivity if we have to censor ourselves and, you know, not be as harsh as we actually feel. Honesty, totally. I think is usually where it's at with our giving our book reactions and reviews. And that's brutal that happened.
So I've done this for 30 minutes more than I normally do it. I've had a wonderful time. A couple things, Ben, you got to come back on because I have about a million more things I want to talk to you about. So we got to find a way to do this again together. To the people commenting, I'm going to try to make my next guest a little more boring so that we can get through comments during the chat. So my apologies that I was way more engaged with Ben than I was with you, but you know, it'll all work itself out in the end. But anyways, it's been awesome. I'm going to link Ben's channel down in the description so you can find his stuff. Please check him out. Ben is one of the, I've said this before and I feel bad about saying it. I don't really watch a lot of BookTube, and Ben is like one of the only ones that I actually routinely watch. So you got to check out his stuff. It's awesome. And we happen to agree on, I don't know, 90% of opinions.
Probably. Yeah.
So
more.
Yeah. Possibly. It's nice being able to find somebody out there that I can agree with. Cool. Well, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. And we will have to do this again very soon.
Indeed. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.